Teacher laughs at autistic girl, until her Mafia boss father walks in and says apologize. Now, the spelling test was going badly. Isabella Romano sat at a desk in Mrs. Brennan's 4th grade classroom, her hands pressed tight over her ears, rocking slightly. The fluorescent lights buzzed too loud. The pencil scratching sounded like knives. 30 students working silently felt like thunder in her chest. She couldn't focus. The words blurred. Her special pencil grip, the one her occupational therapist recommended, lay broken on the floor. Someone had snapped it during recess. Isabella. Mrs. Lydia Brennan's voice cut through the room like glass. Sit still. Everyone else is working. I'm trying, Isabella whispered, her voice barely audible. The lights hurt. Everything hurt. Trying isn't good enough. Lydia walked toward her desk, heels clicking on linoleum. You have accommodations other students don't get. Extra time. Fewer words. Special tools. And still, you can't perform like a normal child. The word normal landed like a slap. Isabella's hands trembled. She wanted to explain about the lights, the noise, and the way her brain worked differently. Not broken, just different. But words wouldn't come. They never came when she needed them most. Maybe, Lydia said loud enough for everyone to hear, your father doesn't care enough to get you proper help. The classroom door opened. Before we start, let me know in the comment section which country in this beautiful world you are watching from, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to this amazing channel. That way, YouTube will keep showing you wonderful stories from this channel. Now, let's begin. The morning had started like every other morning in room 3B. Mrs. Lydia Brennan arrived at 7:15 a.m., precisely 45 minutes before students, carrying her leather briefcase and a coffee that had gone cold during her commute. She arranged her desk with military precision. Gradebook left, attendance sheet center, discipline referrals right. For 15 years, she'd ruled this classroom. High test scores. Low parent complaints, the ones that mattered, anyway. A reputation for no-nonsense discipline that administrators praised during faculty meetings. Principal Hartwell called her the backbone of Westfield Elementary. What they didn't see, what they chose not to see, was the cost. Isabella Romano represented everything Lydia despised about modern education. Accommodations. Individualized education plans. Sensory sensitivities. In Lydia's view, these were excuses for lazy parenting and children who simply needed to try harder. Isabella was 8 years old, bright-eyed when she wasn't overwhelmed, capable of discussing marine biology with college-level vocabulary. But she rocked when anxious, flapped her hands when excited, couldn't maintain eye contact, went nonverbal when stressed. Autism, the diagnosis said. Disruption, Lydia called it. Class, take out your spelling practice books, Lydia announced at 9 a.m. sharp. Today's test covers words 1 through 20. You've had all week to study. 30 students rustled papers. Isabella's hands were already shaking. Her aide, Maria Gonzalez, had called in sick something about her daughter's emergency. The substitute aide hadn't arrived yet. Isabella was alone. The fluorescent lights hummed their cruel song. Someone's chair scraped the floor like nails on a chalkboard. The clock's ticking felt like explosions in Isabella's skull. She pressed her hands over her ears, trying to block it out. Isabella. Lydia's voice, sharp as a blade. Hands on your desk. Isabella tried. She really tried. But the sounds kept coming, overwhelming, drowning her. Isabella Romano, I said hands on your desk. Now. The other students were staring. David Chris whispered something to his neighbor. Someone giggled. Isabella's face burned with shame. She managed to lower her hands, gripping the edge of her desk so hard her knuckles went white. The classroom spun. Her breath came too fast, too shallow. Number 1, Lydia began. Accommodation. Use it in a sentence. The irony was lost on no one but Lydia herself. Isabella stared at the blank paper. The word swam in her vision. She knew it. She'd practiced it. But her hand wouldn't move. The pencil felt wrong, too light without her special grip, too smooth, too everything. Isabella, everyone else is writing. She picked up the pencil. Her hand trembled so badly the first letter came out illegible. She tried again. The was too small, the C too large, nothing looked right. This is unacceptable. Lydia's heels clicked closer. She stood over Isabella's desk, looking down at the shaking child with barely concealed disgust. You have more accommodations than any student I've taught in 15 years. Extra time. Reduced workload. Special equipment. And you still can't complete a simple spelling test? Isabella's eyes filled with tears. Don't cry, she told herself. Don't cry. That makes it worse. Maybe the problem isn't the test, Lydia continued, her voice carrying across the silent classroom. Maybe the problem is effort. Or maybe she paused, letting the words hang heavy. Maybe your father doesn't care enough to actually get you the help you need. The words detonated in Isabella's chest. Her father, who learned sign language so they could communicate when she went nonverbal. Her father, who installed blackout curtains in her room because bright lights hurt. Her father, who let her info dump about dolphins for hours without complaint. Her father, who loved her exactly as she was. That's not true, Isabella whispered, but her voice was so small it barely existed. What was that? Lydia leaned down, mockery dripping from every syllable. Speak up, Isabella. Use your words. That's what they're for. But Isabella's words had abandoned her. They fled, the way they always did when the world became too much. She sat frozen, tears streaming down her face, unable to defend herself, unable to move. The other students watched with the horrified fascination of children witnessing cruelty they didn't fully understand. Some looked uncomfortable. Others, coached by months of Lydia's subtle messaging, looked vaguely amused. This was the problem child. The one who got special treatment. The one who made everything harder. Well, Lydia straightened, brushing invisible dust from her blazer. I suppose we can't expect much from students who aren't willing to try. Back to your seats, everyone. Isabella will remain here until she completes at least one word correctly. The test continued around her. Isabella sat in her prison of fluorescent light and scratching pencils, and the knowledge that everyone had just witnessed her humiliation. In her pocket, her phone buzzed. Not her phone, the emergency phone Maria had given her before getting sick. If Mrs. Brennan is really mean again, Maria had whispered, you text your papa. Use the button I showed you. Isabella's hand crept to her pocket. She pressed the button. Federico Romano was not a patient man by nature. Patience was a skill he'd cultivated through decades of careful strategy, brutal negotiations, and the knowledge that the first person to lose their temper usually lost everything. But patience had its limits. The emergency meeting with the Castellano family was approaching its third hour. They were arguing over territory boundaries, the same boundaries they'd been arguing about for 6 months, ever since Federico proposed the unprecedented peace treaty that would unite 5 crime families under a single accord. The dock access stays neutral, Carlo Castellano insisted for the 10th time. My family has worked those docks for 30 years. And my family has operated shipping through those same docks for 40, Federico replied calmly. Which is precisely why it should be neutral territory. Shared profit, shared oversight. Marco Rossi, Federico's strategist and oldest friend, watched the exchange with practiced neutrality. He'd seen Federico negotiate everything from drug trafficking routes to political bribes to ceasefires between warring families. The man was brilliant, calculating, utterly ruthless when necessary. But in the past 5 years, something had changed. Ever since Isabella. Federico's phone, set to silent during meetings, vibrated against the table. Once. Twice. The emergency code. His entire body went rigid. Excuse me, Federico said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that ended discussion. We'll resume in 10 minutes. We are in the middle of. Federico was already standing, phone pressed to his ear, listening to the automated message. Emergency alert from Isabella's device. GPS location, Westfield Elementary School, room 3B. His blood ran cold. Marco. Victor. 2 words, spoken with absolute clarity. Both men rose immediately, reading the storm in their boss's eyes. What happened? Marco asked once they were in the hallway. Isabella's emergency button. Federico was already moving toward the exit. Someone's hurting my daughter. Victor, head of security and a man who'd broken bones for less, had the car running before Federico finished the sentence. They drove in tense silence, Federico's jaw tight enough to crack teeth. His mind raced through possibilities. Bullying. Accident. Medical emergency. Each scenario worse than the last, each feeding the fury building in his chest. He'd built an empire on calculated violence. destroyed rivals with strategic precision, negotiated peace between families that had been killing each other for generations. All of it, every brutal decision, every calculated risk had been to create a world safe enough for his daughter. And someone, somewhere, had made her afraid enough to press that button. The school secretary's attempted intervention lasted approximately 3 seconds. "Sir, you need to sign in." "Sir, classes are in session." "Sir." Victor's presence ended the discussion. The secretary reached for the phone, presumably to call security, then thought better of it when she saw Victor's expression. They walked directly to room 3B. Through the small window in the door, Federico saw his daughter. Hands over ears. Rocking slightly. Tears streaming down her face. Frozen in a state of distress he'd spent 5 years learning to recognize and prevent. And standing over her desk, a woman in a burgundy blazer, speaking words Federico couldn't hear but could read in Isabella's devastated expression. He didn't knock. Didn't announce himself. Simply opened the door mid-sentence. "Your father doesn't care enough to actually get you the help you." The classroom fell silent as if someone had cut the power. 30 students turned as one. The teacher, Mrs. Brennan, according to the nameplate on her desk, stopped speaking, irritation flickering across her face as she turned to address whoever had interrupted her lesson. Then she saw him. Federico ignored her completely. Crossed to Isabella's desk in 4 long strides. Knelt beside his daughter, removing his Armani jacket to block the fluorescent lights overhead, a trick he'd learned years ago, one that sometimes helped. "Piccola," he murmured in Italian. "I'm here." Isabella crashed into his arms with a sob that shattered his heart. He held her, feeling her small body shake, her hands gripping his shirt like a lifeline. Over her head, his eyes finally met Lydia Brennan's. She'd gone pale. Recognition was beginning to dawn. Expensive suit, 2 dangerous-looking men blocking the door, the absolute authority with which he'd entered her classroom. Federico stood slowly, Isabella still in his arms. His voice, when he spoke, was soft. Almost gentle. The kind of softness that preceded violence. "Apologize." Now. Lydia Brennan's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. Her mind scrambled to process what was happening. The expensive suit that probably cost more than her monthly salary, the 2 men at the door who radiated controlled danger, the way every student had gone utterly silent. "I don't know who you think you are," she stammered, trying to gather the authority she'd wielded so confidently minutes ago, "but you can't just burst into my classroom and apologize." Federico didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. The word carried the weight of absolute expectation. Behind him, Marco had pulled out his phone, fingers moving with practiced efficiency. Within 30 seconds, he had the information Federico needed. Lydia Brennan, 42, divorced, 15 years teaching experience. 5 formal complaints filed by parents, all dismissed by administration. One of the students, David Chris, his face pale, whispered to his neighbor, "That's Isabella's dad. My uncle says his, like, really dangerous. Like, on the news." The whisper spread like wildfire. Phones appeared from backpacks, strictly against classroom rules, but who was enforcing anything now? Texts flew. "OMG, Isabella Romano's dad just walked into Brennan's class. You know who her dad is, right? Google Federico Romano." Holy shit. Principal Marcus Hartwell burst through the door 2 minutes later, summoned by the frantic secretary. "Mr. Romano, I'm going to have to ask you to." He froze mid-sentence. "Federico Romano." Lord Fred. The man whose face appeared in news reports about organized crime investigations, whose name was whispered in connection with everything from political corruption to the historic peace treaty being negotiated between 5 crime families. Standing in classroom 3B. Holding his daughter. Staring at Lydia Brennan with eyes that promised consequences. "Principal Hartwell," Federico said calmly. "Your teacher was publicly humiliating my daughter. Mocking her autism. Suggesting I don't care enough to get her proper help." His voice hardened on those last words. "I'd like to hear her explanation." Hartwell's face cycled through several expressions. Confusion, recognition, fear, calculation. "I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding."
"No misunderstanding."
A new voice, quiet but firm, came from the back corner. Maria Gonzalez, Isabella's aide, stepped forward. She was supposed to be out sick, but looking at her determined expression, Federico realized she'd never been sick at all. She'd been documenting. I called in sick today because I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore, Maria continued, pulling a tablet from her bag. I've been Isabella's aide for 6 months. I've documented every incident, every humiliation, every IEP accommodation that Mrs. Brennan has denied. I've filed reports with administration. All dismissed. She looked at Hartwell. You told me I was misinterpreting teaching methods. That I was too sensitive. That Mrs. Brennan was a veteran educator who knew what she was doing. She held up the tablet. I have videos, photographs, emails, 6 months of documentation showing systematic abuse of special needs students. The classroom was utterly silent. 30 students watched with wide eyes. Some held phones, still recording. This would be on social media within the hour. Lydia found her voice, though it shook. This is ridiculous. I've dedicated 15 years to education. I have the highest test scores in the school. Because you encourage disabled students to be absent during testing, Maria interrupted. I have emails proving it. You told Mrs. Martinez that her son's ADHD would lower class averages and suggested he stay home on standardized test days. Hartwell's face went white. Federico's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. So it's not just my daughter. It's systematic. 7 special needs students in this class alone, Maria confirmed. All showing signs of emotional distress. All being denied legal accommodations. And when aides like me report it, we are threatened with termination for being disruptive to classroom dynamics. Isabella, still in her father's arms, signed something. Federico smiled grimly and nodded. My daughter wants you to know, he translated, that you also hurt Ryan, who has dyslexia, and Sophia, who uses a wheelchair. She wants you to know that you made them cry too. He set Isabella down gently, making sure she was steady. Then he turned his full attention to Lydia Brennan. I've toppled empires for lesser offences than harming my child, Federico said conversationally. I've ended careers, destroyed reputations, made people disappear from public life so completely that history forgets they existed. Lydia took an involuntary step back. But I'm not going to do any of that, Federico continued. Instead, I'm going to use every legal resource at my disposal. My lawyers and their very good lawyers will review every IEP violation, every documented incident, every complaint that was suppressed. We'll file with the State Education Board, the Office for Civil Rights, the media. He looked at Hartwell. We are going to have a conversation about how special needs students are treated in this school. Today. Now. And it will be very thorough. Hartwell opened his mouth, closed it, then managed. Perhaps we should discuss this in my office. No. Federico's voice carried absolute finality. We'll discuss it in the presence of every parent whose child has been harmed. In a formal hearing. With my lawyers present. And with consequences. He picked up Isabella again, sensing her exhaustion. We are leaving. Isabella won't return to this classroom. Maria, I'd like you to compile your complete documentation and send it to my legal team. Principal Hartwell, expect contact from my attorneys within the hour. As he walked toward the door, he paused beside Lydia. His voice dropped to something cold and final. You haven't apologized yet. To my daughter or to any of the children you've hurt. But you will. Publicly. Completely. And you'll never teach again. You can't threaten me. That wasn't a threat, Mrs. Brennan. It was a promise. That evening, Federico's penthouse overlooked a city draped in twilight. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline, a kingdom of glass and steel that he'd helped shape through decades of strategic influence, both legitimate and otherwise. Isabella sat in her safe space, a corner of the living room transformed into her sanctuary. Weighted blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her favorite documentary about deep-sea creatures playing softly on the screen. Luna, her golden retriever service dog, pressed against her side with the devoted patience only dogs possess. Federico had learned to read his daughter's recovery process. The way her breathing gradually steadied. How her hands stopped trembling. The moment when she felt safe enough to communicate again. She signed first, her small hands moving with practiced precision. Was it bad that you came to school? He sat beside her, careful not to crowd her space, and signed back, never bad. Always come when you need me. Kids will talk. Say you're scary. I am scary to people who hurt you. Not scary to you. Isabella's forehead creased in concentration, processing this. Then, Mrs. Brennan was mean to other kids too. Not just me. Federico's hand stilled. Other kids with autism? A nod. And Ryan, who has dyslexia. And Sophia, who uses a wheelchair. She makes them cry. Something cold and calculating settled in Federico's chest, the same feeling that preceded every major strategic move he'd ever made. But this wasn't about territory or business rivals or peace negotiations. This was about children. Vulnerable children being systematically harmed by someone who was supposed to protect them. He kissed the top of Isabella's head and stood, stepping out onto the terrace where Marco and Victor waited in the gathering darkness. The teacher, Federico said quietly, is not an isolated problem. It's systemic. Marco pulled out his tablet, already 2 steps ahead. I had Dimitri run preliminary research. Lydia Brennan, 42, divorced, 15 years teaching experience at Westfield Elementary. 5 formal complaints filed by parents over the past decade, all dismissed by administration. 3 were from parents of special needs students. Administration buried them, Victor added, his gravel voice carrying the weight of someone who'd spent decades reading organizational corruption. Principal Hartwell's been there 8 years. School board president is his former college roommate. They protect their own. Federico stared out at his city, in ways that had nothing to do with legitimate governance. He'd spent 20 years building power, establishing control, creating an empire built on fear and strategic violence. The current peace negotiations were meant to transform that empire into something sustainable, something his daughter could inherit without blood on her hands. But what good was an empire if Isabella wasn't safe in a classroom? Tomorrow, Federico said, voice carrying the decisive edge that ended discussions, we start a comprehensive investigation. Every complaint against Brennan. Every special needs student in that school. Every policy violation. I want documentation so thorough that even the school board can't ignore it. And Brennan? Victor asked. She apologizes to my daughter. Publicly. Federico's voice went cold. And then she faces consequences for every child she's harmed.
Marco hesitated.
Boss, the peace negotiations. Carlo Castellano's already suspicious about your priorities. If you go after a teacher, some families might see it as you going soft, prioritizing civilian problems over business. Federico turned, and Marco saw something in his boss's eyes he'd only glimpsed a few times, a man who'd made his decision and would destroy anyone who stood in his way. Then they'll learn, Federico said simply, that my daughter's well-being is business. And anyone who thinks protecting her is weakness can test that theory personally. He looked back at the window, where Isabella was visible in the soft light, Luna's head resting in her lap, her small hands moving gently through the dog's fur. My father used to say that power is about inspiring fear, Federico continued quietly. That the moment people stop being afraid of you, you've lost everything. I built my empire on that principle. Destroyed rivals. Eliminated threats. Negotiated from positions of absolute strength. And now? Marco asked. Now I have a daughter who's afraid of fluorescent lights and loud noises and teachers who call her broken. Federico's voice carried something Marco had never heard before, not weakness, but transformation. What's the point of building an empire if the people I love aren't safe in the world I've created? Victor spoke up, his tone careful. The peace treaty is important, boss. 5 families, united for the first time in 40 years. That's your legacy. No. Federico shook his head. Isabella is my legacy. Everything else is just scaffolding. He pulled out his phone, scrolling to a contact he'd never thought he'd need. Dr. Sarah Criss, a civil rights attorney who specialized in disability discrimination cases. They'd met at a fundraiser 3 years ago. She'd been bold enough to tell the notorious Federico Romano that his charitable foundation should focus more on educational equity. He'd been impressed. Kept her card. Now he typed, need your expertise. Educational discrimination case. My daughter and others. Name your fee. The response came within minutes. Mr. Romano. I'll review your case. But my fee isn't what you think. If I take this, we do it right. Full investigation, systemic reform, not just revenge. And you let me handle the legal strategy. Federico smiled grimly and typed back, agreed. Come to my office tomorrow. Bring your team. Within 48 hours, Federico's organization, a machine typically used for tracking rival families, monitoring police investigations, and maintaining territorial control redirected its full attention to Westfield Elementary School. Dmitry Volkov, who normally compiled intelligence on everything from political corruption to drug trafficking routes, found himself researching educational policies, IEP law, and special education compliance standards. "This is weird, boss," Dmitry muttered, scrolling through his laptop in Federico's office. "I've tracked international arms dealers, infiltrated police departments, but school records? This is a different kind of corruption." "Corruption is corruption," Federico replied. "What did you find?" Dmitry's expression darkened. "It's worse than we thought. Way worse." He pulled up a comprehensive spreadsheet on the wall-mounted screen. Lydia Brennan, documentation of violations. 7 special needs students in current 4th grade class, all showing documented signs of emotional distress. 12 formal complaints filed over 15 years, not 5 initial research missed sealed records accessed through alternative channels. 2 students transferred out mid-year after incidents that were covered up by administration. 4 IEP violations in Isabella's case alone, legally mandated accommodations systematically denied. 6 instances of retaliation against aides who advocated for students. Pattern of test score manipulation, encouraging disabled students to be absent during standardized testing. But here's where it gets interesting, Dmitry continued, pulling up financial records. Principal Hartwell has been receiving performance bonuses tied to standardized test scores. Brennan's class consistently scores highest in the school because she's systematically excluding disabled students from testing pools. "That's fraud," Marco said from his position by the window. "That's federal fraud," Dr. Sarah Chris corrected, entering the office with 2 assistants carrying boxes of files. "And it violates Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and about 6 different provisions of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act." She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, with steel grey hair and eyes that had seen every kind of institutional corruption imaginable. She'd spent 30 years fighting for disability rights, winning cases against school districts, corporations, and government agencies. She was not impressed by Federico Romano's reputation. "Mr. Romano," she said, setting down her briefcase with a decisive thump. "Before we begin, let's establish ground rules. I don't work for criminals. I don't facilitate revenge. And I don't cut corners."
Understood, Federico replied calmly.
"But," Dr. Chris continued, her voice softening slightly, "I do fight for children who've been systematically abused by educational institutions. And from what I've reviewed in your preliminary documentation, Westfield Elementary has been violating federal law for over a decade." She opened her briefcase, pulling out a thick folder. "I've contacted 7 families. Would you like to hear their stories?" Sofia Martinez sat in Federico's conference room, hands wrapped around a coffee cup she wasn't drinking. Her son, Diego, had been in Lydia Brennan's class 2 years ago. "Diego has ADHD," Sofia said quietly. "He's a good kid. Loves baseball, wants to be a veterinarian. But he can't sit still for long periods. His IEP allows movement breaks, fidget tools, preferential seating." "And Mrs. Brennan?" Dr. Chris prompted gently. "She called him disruptive. Said fidgeting was disrespectful. Took away his fidget cube and threw it in the trash." Sophia's voice broke. "She made him stand in the back of the classroom during lessons. Said he could sit when he learned to act like the other students." "Did you file a complaint?" 3 complaints. Sophia's hands tightened around the cup. "Principal Hartwell told me I was being overprotective. That Mrs. Brennan was trying to prepare Diego for the real world where nobody gets special treatment. That maybe if I disciplined him better at home, he wouldn't need so many accommodations." "What happened to Diego?" Federico asked. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "He started wetting the bed. Having panic attacks before school. His therapist diagnosed him with anxiety disorder triggered by school trauma. We transferred him mid-year. He's doing better now, but he still flinches when teachers raise their voices. Robert and Lisa Williams' daughter, Mai, was currently in Brennan's class. Mai had generalized anxiety disorder and selective mutism. She could speak at home but often went nonverbal in stressful situations. Mrs. Brennan doesn't believe selective mutism is real, Lisa said bitterly. She thinks Mai is being defiant. That she's choosing not to speak to get attention. Mai has IEP accommodations allowing her to respond in writing or through her communication device, Robert added. Brennan refuses to allow it. Says she needs to use her words like everyone else. Last month, Lisa continued, voice shaking with anger, Brennan made my stand in front of the class until she spoke. I stood there for 20 minutes, tears streaming down her face, until she finally had a panic attack and had to be taken to the nurse's office. Did you complain? Dr. Chris asked. We tried. Robert's jaw tightened. Hartwell said Brennan was using tough love to help my overcome her anxiety. That sometimes children need to be pushed outside their comfort zones. Your daughter had a panic attack, Federico said, his voice dangerously quiet. They called it a learning experience, Lisa replied. Send her back to class the next day. Marcus Johnson came alone. His wife couldn't face talking about their son, Elijah, without breaking down. Elijah was autistic. High support needs. He'd been mainstreamed into Brennan's class as part of an inclusion initiative. It was a disaster from day one, Marcus said flatly. Elijah has sensory processing issues. Needs a quiet space to decompress. His IEP mandates access to the sensory room when he's overwhelmed. Mrs. Brennan? Dr. Chris prompted. Refused. Said if Elijah couldn't handle the classroom environment, he should be in special ed where he belongs. She blocked his access to the sensory room, claiming he was using it to avoid work. When he had a meltdown, and he had several, because he was constantly overwhelmed, she made him sit in the corner facing the wall. Called it a cool-down consequence. Marcus's voice went cold. Elijah stopped talking entirely. Just stopped. For 6 weeks, my son didn't speak a single word. His therapist said he was traumatized, experiencing selective mutism as a trauma response. Where is Elijah now? Federico asked. Homeschooled. My wife quit her job to teach him. We can't afford it. We were a 2-income family, but we couldn't keep sending him to a place that was destroying him. He looked directly at Federico. I heard you walked into Brennan's classroom. That you're going after the school. Whatever you need from me, testimony, documentation, anything, I'm in. I want her to face consequences for what she did to my son. Keisha Williams's daughter, Jasmine, had dyslexia. Bright, creative, struggled with reading and writing. Mrs. Brennan called her lazy, Keisha said, anger vibrating through every word. Said dyslexia was an excuse for not trying hard enough. Jasmine's IEP allows her to use text-to-speech software and audiobooks. Brennan refused, said it was cheating. Jasmine started bringing home failing grades on written assignments where she should have been allowed to use assistive technology. When I confronted Brennan, she told me I was enabling my daughter's laziness and that maybe Jasmine needed to be held back a year to learn proper study habits. Keisha's voice broke. My daughter is 9 years old. She came home crying, saying she was stupid, that her brain was broken, that she wished she was dead so she wouldn't have to go to school anymore. The conference room went silent. She said she wished she was dead? Dr. Chris asked quietly. Keisha nodded, tears streaming down her face. 9 years old. Because a teacher made her believe she was worthless. Federico sat through each interview with controlled fury. Marco had seen him negotiate with rival families, stare down federal investigators, order consequences for betrayal without flinching. But watching his boss listen to these parents, seeing the way Federico's hands clenched when they described their children suffering, Marco realized this was different. This wasn't business. This was personal. And when Federico Romano made something personal, empires fell. Dr. Chris, Federico said once the last family had left, what do we need to build an irrefutable case? Testimonies from families which we now have. Documentation from Maria and other aides who witnessed the abuse. IEP records showing violations. Expert testimony about the psychological harm caused. And she paused. We need to prove administrative knowledge and cover-up. Hartwell knew, Marco said. He's been suppressing complaints for years. Knowing and proving are different things, Dr. Chris replied. We need evidence. Emails. Meeting minutes. Written documentation that shows systematic cover-up.
Federico smiled grimly.
Dimitri, how difficult would it be to access the school district's email server? Dimitri looked up from his laptop. Boss, that's illegal. I'm aware. I could have it done in 3 hours. Make it 2. Dr. Chris cleared her throat. Mr. Romano, I explicitly said no illegal activity. Dr. Chris, Federico interrupted gently, I'm hiring you to build a legal case. What my IT specialist does in his spare time is outside your purview. She stared at him. Then, almost imperceptibly, she smiled. I see. Well, if someone were to anonymously provide documentation to our legal team, we'd be obligated to review it for relevance to our case. Hypothetically, Federico agreed. Hypothetically, she confirmed. 2 hours later, Dimitri had accessed 5 years of email correspondence between Principal Hartwell, Lydia Brennan, and the school board. What they found was damning. Email. October 15, 2019 from Lydia Brennan to Marcus Hartwell. Subject, Diego Martinez. Marcus, Diego's mother is demanding another meeting about his IEP accommodations. She's threatening to file another complaint with the district. Can you handle this? I don't have time for helicopter parents who expect me to babysit their hyperactive children. Response. October 15, 2019 from Marcus Hartwell to Lydia Brennan. Subject, Diego Martinez. I'll speak with Mrs. Martinez. Your test scores are the highest in the school, Lydia. The district recognizes your excellence. Don't let one difficult parent undermine your methods. I'll make sure this goes away. Email. March 3, 2021 from Marcus Hartwell to School Board President Douglas Castro. Subject, Complaint, Elijah Johnson. Doug, we have another parent complaint about Lydia Brennan's classroom management. The Johnsons are threatening to contact the State Education Board about IEP violations. This is the 3rd complaint this year. Response. March 4, 2021 from Douglas Castro to Marcus Hartwell. Subject, Complaint, Elijah Johnson. Marcus, Brennan's test scores are essential for our district's overall performance metrics. The state uses those scores to determine funding. We can't afford to lose our highest performing teacher over complaints from parents who want special treatment for their kids. Document that you address the concern, offer some minor accommodation as a compromise, and close the file. If they persist, remind them that alternative placements are available if they feel their child isn't thriving in a mainstream classroom. Email. September 12, 2023 from Maria Gonzalez, aide, to Marcus Hartwell. Subject, Urgent, IEP violations. Principal Hartwell, I'm writing to document serious concerns about Mrs. Brennan's treatment of special needs students. I've witnessed multiple IEP violations, including denial of accommodations, public humiliation of students with disabilities, and what I believe constitutes emotional abuse. As a mandatory reporter, I'm obligated to bring this to your attention. I've attached documentation of specific incidents. Please advise on next steps. Response. September 13, 2023 from Marcus Hartwell to Maria Gonzalez. Subject, Urgent, IEP violations. Ms. Gonzalez, I've reviewed your concerns. Mrs. Brennan is a 15-year veteran with an excellent track record. What you're interpreting as violations are established teaching methods designed to challenge students to reach their potential. As an aide, your role is to support the teacher's instructional decisions, not to undermine her authority. Please focus on your assigned duties. Further complaints of this nature may be considered insubordination. They knew, Dr. Chris said, reading through the emails. They knew, and they actively covered it up. Not just covered up, Dimitri added. Actively protected Brennan because of test scores. They sacrificed disabled children for funding metrics. Federico stood at the window, looking out at the city lights. When he spoke, his voice was soft, the dangerous softness that Marco had learned to fear. Schedule a meeting with Principal Hartwell, Federico said. Private. Just him, me, and Marco. Boss Marco started. I'm not going to hurt him, Federico interrupted. I'm going to offer him a choice. Cooperation or destruction. He's going to provide testimony about the board's knowledge and cover-up. He's going to cooperate fully with Dr. Chris's investigation. And if he refuses? Federico smiled without humor. Then every email, every suppressed complaint, every instance of fraud goes to the State Education Board, the Federal Office for Civil Rights, the media, and his teaching license board. His career will be over. His pension will be challenged. And I'll make sure everyone knows that Marcus Hartwell sacrificed disabled children to protect test scores. He'll cooperate, Marco predicted. They always do, Federico agreed. Principal Marcus Hartwell sat in a coffee shop 2 blocks from Westfield Elementary, waiting. The location had been specified in the text message. Tomorrow, 4 p.m., Riverside Cafe. Come alone. We need to discuss your future. The message had come from an unknown number. But Hartwell knew exactly who'd sent it. He'd spent the last 48 hours in a state of escalating panic. His personal email, how did they get his personal email? Had received a single message containing a PDF. No text. Just an attachment. The PDF contained 12 pages of emails. His emails. Correspondence with Brennan, with the school board, with the district superintendent. Emails that documented 15 years of suppressed complaints, ignored IEP violations, and systematic discrimination against disabled students. Emails that proved he'd knowingly protected an abusive teacher because her test scores made him look good. At 4 p.m. precisely, 2 men entered the cafe. Federico Romano and someone else, expensive suit, calculating eyes, the posture of someone who'd survived dangerous situations through intelligence rather than violence. They sat without invitation. Principal Hartwell, Federico said pleasantly. Thank you for meeting us. This is Marco Rossi, my associate. We have a proposition for you. Hartwell's hand shook around his coffee cup. I could lose my job for meeting with you. You're going to lose much more than your job if you don't, Marco interrupted. Those emails? We have all of them. 5 years of documentation proving you systematically violated federal disability laws, suppressed mandatory reporter complaints, and committed fraud by manipulating standardized test scores. I didn't. You encouraged Lydia Brennan to have disabled students absent during testing windows, Federico said, his voice still pleasant. You told the school board that alternative placements should be suggested to parents who complained. You threatened aides with termination for reporting abuse. You told Maria Gonzalez that further complaints would be considered insubordination. Hartwell went pale. So here's your choice, Marco continued. Option 1. You cooperate fully with our investigation. You provide complete testimony about the school board's knowledge and involvement. You acknowledge your role in covering up abuse. You resign quietly. And in exchange, we don't pursue criminal charges for federal civil rights violations. Criminal charges? Hartwell's voice cracked. I was just trying to protect test scores at the expense of disabled children's safety, Federico finished. Yes, we know. And so will the Federal Office for Civil Rights, the State Education Board, and every major media outlet in the city if you choose option 2. What's option 2? We destroy you, Marco said simply. Every email goes public. We file federal complaints. We coordinate with the 7 families who are prepared to name you as a defendant in a class action lawsuit. Your teaching license will be revoked. Your pension will be challenged. And he leaned forward. Mr. Romano will personally ensure that every educational institution in the state knows exactly who Marcus Hartwell is and what he did. Hartwell stared at his coffee. His career. His reputation. His retirement. Everything he'd built over 20 years in education. Gone. I have a family, he whispered. So do the children you harmed, Federico replied, his voice hardening. So does my daughter, who came home traumatized because you protected a teacher who called her broken. So does Elijah Johnson, who stopped speaking for 6 weeks. So does Jasmine Williams, who told her mother she wanted to die. The words landed like physical blows. What exactly do you want from me? Hartwell asked. Marco slid a document across the table. Full cooperation. Testimony against the school board. Documentation of every suppressed complaint. And a signed statement acknowledging your role in creating and maintaining a hostile environment for disabled students. If I sign this, I'm admitting to federal crimes. If you don't sign it, you're facing federal prosecution, Marco corrected. This way, you avoid criminal charges. You keep your pension reduced, but intact. You resign quietly. And you never work in education again. That's my entire career. You forfeited your career when you chose test scores over children's safety, Federico said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute finality. Sign the document, Principal Hartwell. Or I'll spend the next year of my life making sure you face every consequence you've avoided for 15 years. Hartwell looked at the document. Then at Federico. Then at the reality of his situation. He pulled out a pen. The emergency school board meeting was called for Thursday evening. Closed to the public, or it was supposed to be. But somehow, mysteriously, 20 parents with disabled children received anonymous invitations with the meeting room number and time. Also present, local media, tipped off by an anonymous source about explosive revelations regarding disability discrimination at Westfield Elementary. School Board President Douglas Castro was visibly furious as parents and reporters filed into the meeting room. "This is a closed session." Actually, Dr. Sarah Criss, no relation, said crisply, striding in with her legal team, "Under the Open Meetings Act, discussions regarding public complaints and civil rights violations must be accessible to affected parties. These parents are affected parties. And since federal law is involved, the media has a legitimate public interest right to observe. We haven't agreed to." "You don't have to agree," Dr. Criss interrupted. "It's federal law. Now, shall we begin? Or would you prefer I file a preliminary injunction claiming the board is attempting to conduct closed-door discussions to cover up civil rights violations?" Douglas Castro's face went red, but he gestured curtly to the seats. "Fine. Everyone sit." Federico entered last, deliberately choosing a seat in the back row. He wore an impeccable dark suit, no tie, a careful balance between formal and dangerous. Marco and Victor flanked him silently. The meeting began with Principal Hartwell's voluntary resignation effective immediately. No explanation given, just a terse announcement that was clearly meant to end discussion. "But Dr. Criss stood. "Before we move past Principal Hartwell's resignation, the board needs to be aware of several federal complaints that will be filed tomorrow morning." She distributed packets thick, comprehensive, devastating. 7 families are filing complaints with the Office for Civil Rights regarding systematic discrimination against disabled students at Westfield Elementary. We have documentation spanning 15 years, including 43 IEP violations, 18 instances of denied accommodations, 27 mandatory reporter complaints that were suppressed, evidence of standardized testing fraud, email correspondence proving administrative knowledge and cover-up. The board members paged through the documents, their faces progressively paling. Board member Janet Morrison spoke first. "These allegations are serious, but they concern one teacher. They concern systematic administrative failure," Dr. Criss corrected. Principal Hartwell actively suppressed complaints. She pointed at Douglas Castro, advised him to offer minor accommodations and close files rather than properly investigating abuse. Board member Thompson authorized Brennan's continued employment despite multiple complaints. "This isn't one teacher. This is institutional rot. That's defamatory," Thompson started. "It's documented fact," Dr. Criss interrupted, sliding another packet across the table. "These are emails obtained through legal discovery processes. Your emails, specifically. Would you like me to read them aloud?" Thompson shut his mouth. Douglas Castro tried to regain control. "Dr. Criss, these allegations will require thorough investigation through proper channels, which you've been avoiding for 15 years, a voice called from the parent section. Sophia Martinez stood, holding her phone. "I filed 3 complaints about my son being abused." 3. "You did nothing." "Mrs. Martinez, I understand your frustration." "No, you don't." Sophia's voice shook with fury. "You don't understand what it's like to watch your child have panic attacks every morning before school. To have him wet the bed because he's so terrified of his teacher. To be told by the principal that you're just an overprotective parent who doesn't understand tough love." Keisha Williams stood next. "My daughter told me she wanted to die. She's 9 years old. Because Mrs. Brennan convinced her she was stupid and worthless. And when I complained, I was told I was enabling her laziness." Marcus Johnson rose. "My son stopped speaking for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of silence because he was so traumatized by being in that classroom. We lost our second income because my wife had to quit her job to homeschool him. And you did nothing." One by one, parents stood. 7 families. Each with a story. Each with documentation. Each with a child who'd been harmed while the school board protected the person who hurt them. The media cameras recorded everything. Douglas Castro's face had gone from red to pale. "The board will need time to review these allegations. You've had 15 years, Federico said quietly from the back row. Every head turned. Federico stood, buttoning his jacket with deliberate precision. "My name is Federico Romano. My daughter, Isabella, was in Mrs. Brennan's 4th grade class. She came home 3 weeks ago and signed to me that she wished she didn't have autism because it made people hate her. She's 8 years old. He walked slowly toward the front of the room, his voice carrying despite its quietness. I've spent 20 years building power in this city. I've negotiated treaties between families that wanted each other dead. I've restructured entire industries. I've made grown men plead for mercy. He stopped in front of the board's table. And none of that prepared me for watching my daughter believe she's broken because a teacher told her so repeatedly. Mr. Romano, Douglas Castro said nervously, while we sympathize with your daughter's experience, your reputation doesn't give you the right to dictate school policy. I'm not dictating anything, Federico interrupted. I'm informing you that Dr. Chris's legal team will file 7 federal complaints tomorrow. The media will cover it extensively. The Office for Civil Rights will investigate. And you will all be named as defendants in a class action lawsuit for systematic discrimination against disabled students. You can't. I can. And I will. Federico's voice went cold. But I'm offering you the same choice I offered Principal Hartwell. Cooperate voluntarily, implement comprehensive reforms, remove Mrs. Brennan permanently, and face consequences with dignity. Or fight, and I'll spend the next year of my life making sure this board is dismantled, every member's complicity is exposed, and Westfield Elementary becomes a national symbol of institutional failure. Board member Sarah Mitchell, who'd been silent throughout the meeting, finally spoke. I have a daughter with Down syndrome. She's in 2nd grade at Westfield. And I've heard rumors. Complaints that were dismissed. Parents who were afraid to push too hard because they didn't want their children labeled as problems. She looked at her colleagues. We've been protecting the wrong people. Sarah, you can't possibly. I vote to accept external investigation, Mitchell continued, her voice steady. Full audit of our special education programs. Implementation of Mr. Romano's reform proposals. And immediate removal of any staff member who violated student civil rights. Sarah, think about what you're. I'm thinking about my daughter, Mitchell interrupted. I'm thinking about every child we failed because we cared more about test scores than their safety. I vote yes. The room erupted in argument. Board members shouting. Parents applauding. Media cameras rolling. Federico caught Dr. Chris's eye. She nodded fractionally. 1 vote. 1 crack in the wall. It was a start. 2 weeks later, the State Education Board scheduled a formal hearing regarding Lydia Brennan's teaching license. The charge, systematic violation of students' civil rights, abuse of disabled children, and gross professional misconduct. Lydia had hired a union lawyer, Bradley Simmons, known for defending teachers against frivolous complaints from overreactive parents. His strategy was predictable. Portray Brennan as a dedicated educator overwhelmed by increasingly demanding special needs students she'd never been properly trained to handle. Mrs. Brennan represents thousands of teachers facing impossible situations, Simmons would argue. Given insufficient resources, inadequate training, and students with complex needs, she did her best. The real villain here is a system that expects general education teachers to manage special education needs without proper support. It was a good strategy. Sympathetic. Shifted blame to institutional failures rather than individual cruelty. Dr. Chris's team had been preparing for 3 weeks. Documentation. Expert testimony. Parent testimonials. A comprehensive case that would prove Brennan's actions weren't accidents of an overwhelmed teacher, they were deliberate, patterned abuse. But the night before the hearing, Isabella surprised everyone. Dinner at the Romano penthouse was always at 6 p.m. Precisely routine was important for Isabella. Federico had learned to plan his business around this sacred hour.
No meetings.
No calls. Just father and daughter, sharing a meal. Tonight, Isabella pushed her food around her plate, clearly thinking hard about something. Finally, she set down her fork and signed, I want to talk at the meeting. Federico's fork paused mid-air. You don't have to, Piccola. The lawyers will handle it. Other kids need me to. Isabella's face showed a determination Federico had never seen before. Mrs. Brennan made Ryan cry. Made Sophia feel bad about her wheelchair. If I don't say what happened, she might do it again to someone else. Federico's throat tightened. His daughter, who went nonverbal when stressed, who struggled with crowds and loud noises, who'd spent the past 2 weeks having nightmares about that classroom, wanted to testify. It will be hard, he signed carefully. Lots of people watching. Questions. Bright lights and noise. You'll be there. Always. Then I can do it. That night, Federico called Dr. Chris. Isabella wants to testify. A long pause. Mr. Romano, she doesn't have to. Our case is strong without her testimony. She wants to do it for the other children, Federico interrupted. She's braver than I am. Another pause. Okay. We'll prepare her properly. Full accommodations. We'll make it as comfortable as possible. They practiced for a week. Dr. Chris, Maria, Isabella's therapist Dr. Sarah Chris, different Sarah Chris, and Federico created a comprehensive preparation plan. Isabella could use sign language with Maria translating. She could take breaks whenever needed. Luna would be present as her service dog. She could use noise-cancelling headphones. They'd request reduced lighting. She could answer I don't know or I need a minute without pressure. But during practice sessions, Isabella surprised them. She spoke aloud, halting at first, but increasingly clear. Mrs. Brennan said I was broken. Said I made other kids uncomfortable. Said my dad didn't care about me. That's perfect, Isabella, her therapist said gently. You're telling your truth. It's not just my truth, Isabella replied, her 8-year-old voice carrying surprising strength. It's Ryan's truth. And Sophia's. And all the kids she hurt. The State Education Board's hearing room was designed for intimidation. High ceilings. Formal bench where board members sat like judges. Gallery seating for observers. Bright overhead lights. Isabella walked in holding her father's hand, Luna's leash in her other hand. 50 people filled the gallery: parents, media, board members, Lydia Brennan, and her lawyer. Federico felt his daughter's hand tremble. He knelt beside her, signing, You can change your mind. No one will be disappointed. Isabella shook her head. I have to. They sat in the front row. Dr. Chris presented the case: first 40 minutes of documentation, expert testimony about the psychological harm caused by Brennan's actions, and testimonials from 6 families. Then Bradley Simmons, Brennan's lawyer, stood. He was good, sympathetic, reasonable, painting a picture of a dedicated teacher overwhelmed by circumstances beyond her control. Mrs. Brennan spent 15 years serving children. Yes, she made mistakes. Who among us is perfect? But these mistakes came from a system that failed her. A district that didn't provide adequate training. Parents with increasingly complex demands. Students with needs that exceeded her expertise. He gestured to Lydia, who sat with perfectly practiced remorse on her face. She's not a monster. She's a teacher who did her best in impossible circumstances. Then it was Isabella's turn. Dr. Chris approached the bench. The board should know that our final witness is 8 years old and autistic. She's requested to testify, but we are asking for accommodations. Accommodations? Simmons interrupted. Exactly the kind of special treatment that created this situation in the first place. Mr. Simmons, the board chairwoman said sharply, a child with disabilities is entitled to reasonable accommodations under federal law. Continue, Dr. Chris. They dimmed the overhead lights. Isabella walked to the witness chair. Luna pressed against her legs. 50 pairs of eyes watched. The room felt too large, too bright, too loud. She started rocking slightly, hands flapping, her body's natural response to stress. Simmons smirked, clearly planning to reference this disruptive behavior in his closing arguments. But Isabella took a deep breath, looked at her father, and began to sign. Maria stood beside her, translating. My name is Isabella Romano. I have autism. That means my brain works differently, not worse. I am smart. I love marine biology and want to study dolphins. Mrs. Brennan didn't like that I was different. When I rocked or flapped my hands, she said I was being disruptive. When I couldn't look at her eyes, she said I was being disrespectful. When I needed breaks because the lights hurt, she said I was being lazy. She told me I made other kids uncomfortable. She told me I was broken and needed to be fixed. Isabella paused, tears streaming down her face. But she continued, switching to spoken word, small voice, but steady. But I'm not broken. I just need people to understand how my brain works. And when Mrs. Brennan said my dad didn't care about me, her voice broke. That was the worst lie. Because my dad cares about me more than anything. She looked directly at Lydia for the first time. You were supposed to teach me. Instead, you taught me to hate myself. The room was absolutely silent. But my dad taught me something else. He taught me that I deserve to be treated with respect. That all kids like me deserve that. And that when adults do wrong things, other adults have to stop them. Isabella signed her final message, her small hands moving with absolute clarity. I'm not the only one Mrs. Brennan hurt. And I'm speaking up so she can't hurt anyone else. She sat down. Luna immediately nuzzled her hand. Federico wrapped his arm around her shoulders, and for the first time in 20 years, the most dangerous man in the city had visible tears on his face. The hearing board was silent. Then the chairwoman spoke, her voice gentle. Thank you, Isabella. That was incredibly brave. Bradley Simmons had no cross-examination questions. What could he possibly ask? How could he challenge the simple, devastating truth of a child describing her own abuse? Lydia Brennan sat motionless, her practiced remorse cracking. Some part of her, perhaps the part that had once genuinely cared about teaching, seemed to recognize what she'd become. The board deliberated for 20 minutes. When they returned, the chairwoman's voice was formal. Based on the evidence presented, we are suspending Mrs. Brennan's teaching license pending further investigation. Additionally, we are recommending criminal charges be filed for federal civil rights violations, and we are forwarding this case to the Office for Civil Rights for comprehensive review. She looked at Lydia. Mrs. Brennan, you were entrusted with vulnerable children. You systematically harmed them. Whatever challenges you faced, whatever systemic failures existed, you made conscious choices to humiliate, demean, and abuse students who deserved your protection. That is unforgivable. The State Education Board's decision came swiftly and definitively. Lydia Brennan's teaching license was permanently revoked.
No appeals.
No second chances. The board's report used language rarely seen in administrative decisions: systematic abuse, deliberate cruelty, and gross violation of the public trust. But Federico didn't stop there. 3 days after the hearing, he sat in his office with a team that looked nothing like his usual crew. Dr. Sarah Criss and her legal staff, educational policy experts, disability rights advocates, parent representatives from the 7 affected families. The question, Federico said, standing at the head of the conference table, is whether we are satisfied with removing one teacher or whether we want to create lasting change. One teacher is just a symptom, Dr. Criss replied. The disease is systematic failure to protect disabled students. Westfield Elementary isn't unique. This happens in schools across the country. Sophia Martinez, Diego's mother, spoke up. What are you proposing? Federico gestured to Marco, who pulled up a presentation on the wall-mounted screen. The Isabella Romano Special Education Advocacy Center. Mission: ensure no child with disabilities faces discrimination, abuse, or denial of legally mandated accommodations in educational settings. Services: free legal representation for families fighting IEP violations. 24-hour crisis intervention for students facing discrimination. Training programs for teachers on disability awareness and inclusion. Parent advocacy workshops and support groups. Emergency funding for families needing to transfer schools or seek alternative education. Watchdog monitoring of school districts' special education compliance. Funding: $5 million initial endowment from the Romano Family Foundation, with ongoing fundraising and grants. The room went silent. $5 million? Keisha Williams whispered. That's what my daughter's safety is worth, Federico said simply. That's what every disabled child's safety is worth. And it's only the beginning. He looked around the table. I've spent 20 years building power through fear and strategic violence. I've made fortunes through businesses that exist in legal grey areas. I've negotiated truces between families that have been killing each other for generations. His voice softened. And none of it mattered when my daughter came home believing she was broken. So here's what I propose. We don't just punish Lydia Brennan. We transform the system that enabled her. We create infrastructure that protects vulnerable students. We make sure every parent has access to the legal and educational resources they need to fight for their children. Dr. Criss leaned forward. The Advocacy Center is brilliant, but we also need policy changes at the district and state level. Mandatory training. External audits. Real consequences for administrators who suppress complaints. Agreed, Federico said. Marco, what's the status of the school board? Marco pulled up another slide. Douglas Criss resigned yesterday. Under pressure, his law firm was concerned about the liability exposure. Janet Morrison and Robert Thompson are facing recall elections. Sarah Mitchell has emerged as acting board president and is pushing aggressive reforms. Good. What about the peace treaty? This was the question Marco had been dreading. The 5 families are Divided. Carlo Castellano thinks you've gone soft. Says you're spending resources on civilian problems instead of territorial expansion. He's questioning whether you're still capable of leadership. Federico smiled without humor. Carlo's always been short-sighted. Schedule a meeting. All 5 families. Tomorrow. The warehouse on the edge of the industrial district had been neutral ground for 40 years. No family controlled it. No blood had been spilled there. It existed outside the usual rules, a place where peace was possible, even among enemies. Federico arrived with Marco and Victor. The other 4 families were already present: the Castellanos, the Maronis, the De Lucas, and the Volkovs. Carlo Castellano spoke first, his voice dripping with contempt. We are in the middle of the most important peace negotiation in 40 years, and you're spending time on school policies? Playing parent advocate instead of expanding our interests? I'm building something that lasts, Federico replied calmly. You're building weakness, Carlo shot back. Your daughter gets her feelings hurt by a teacher, and you lose focus on what matters. This makes all of us look soft. Federico's voice went cold. My daughter was systematically abused by someone in a position of authority. She was told she was broken, worthless, that her own father didn't care about her. And the system protected her abuser for 15 years. He looked around the table. Any of you have children? Grandchildren? Uncomfortable silence. Sophia, Federico said, looking at Sophia Moroni. Your nephew. The one with cerebral palsy. How's his school treating him? Sophia's face tightened. His school tried to segregate him. Said it was for his own good. And did you fight back? I didn't have the resources. Now you do. Federico slid a folder across the table. The Advocacy Center will provide free legal representation to any family our families included fighting educational discrimination. Your nephew deserves the same protections as any other child. He turned to Victor Volkov. Your granddaughter has dyslexia, doesn't she? Victor's eyes narrowed. How did you? Because I pay attention. Because once you start looking, you realize how many children are being failed by systems that should protect them. Federico's voice hardened. We are negotiating peace to create a better world for our children. What's the point if that world doesn't include schools where disabled children are safe? This isn't our business, Carlo insisted. It is now, Federico replied flatly. Because my business is creating a future worth inheriting. And that includes educational institutions that don't torture children because they learn differently. He stood, buttoning his jacket. Here's my proposal. The peace treaty expands. We don't just negotiate territory and business interests. We collectively invest in community infrastructure, including education reform. We use our influence to ensure schools in our neighborhoods have proper special education programs. We protect all children, not just ours. That's insane. That's evolution, Federico interrupted. We've spent 40 years killing each other over territory. And what do we have to show for it? Streets we control but can't actually use because they're too dangerous for our own families. Businesses that exist in shadows. Children who inherit empires built on blood. He looked each boss in the eye. I'm offering you something different. Real power. The kind that comes from community investment. From being seen as protectors, not predators. From building institutions that last beyond our lifetimes. And if we refuse? Carlo asked. Then the peace treaty fails, and we return to the old ways. And in 10 years, when your grandchildren ask what you built, you'll tell them about territories you controlled and rivals you eliminated. And they'll ask why their schools are failing, why their disabled classmates are abused, why nothing ever changes. Silence filled the warehouse. Finally, Sophia Moroni spoke. I'll contribute. 1 million to the Advocacy Center. And I want my nephew enrolled in their protection program. Viktor Volkov nodded slowly. My granddaughter too. 500,000. One by one, the families agreed, some grudgingly, some genuinely. Even Carlo, recognizing the political reality, contributed. The peace treaty evolved. Territory negotiations were paired with community investment requirements. Violence was replaced with strategic philanthropy. The 5 families, for the first time in history, united around something other than mutual destruction. Federico had transformed his empire not by conquering more territory, but by redefining what power meant. Isabella thrived. She transferred to Riverside Elementary, a school with a nationally recognized special education program, sensory-friendly classrooms, and teachers who'd undergone comprehensive disability awareness training, some of it funded by the Romano Advocacy Center. Her new teacher, Ms. Elena Rodriguez, had 14 years of experience in inclusive education. She understood sensory processing, respected communication differences, celebrated neurodiversity. On Isabella's first day, Ms. Rodriguez had knelt beside her desk and signed, "I'm happy you're here. Your brain is perfect exactly as it is." Isabella had cried. But this time, from relief. Now, 6 months later, she had friends. Ryan, the boy with dyslexia from Westfield, was in her class, his family having transferred after the scandal. They partnered on a science project about marine ecosystems, combining Ryan's autistic skills with Isabella's encyclopedic knowledge of ocean life. Sophia, the girl who used a wheelchair, was in the class too. The school's accessibility had been upgraded, partially funded by surprise and anonymous donation from the Romano Family Foundation. Sophia and Isabella bonded over their shared love of reading. For the first time in her life, Isabella looked forward to school. The Isabella Romano Special Education Advocacy Center operated out of a renovated building downtown. The staff included 4 full-time lawyers specializing in disability rights, 2 parent advocates who'd fought their own battles, a crisis intervention team available 24/7, educational consultants who helped families navigate IEP processes, a network of volunteer attorneys and special education experts. In 6 months, they'd helped 17 families win IEP compliance cases, removed 3 teachers for disability discrimination, forced 2 school districts to implement comprehensive reforms, provided emergency funding to 5 families needing alternative education, trained over 300 teachers in disability awareness, created parent support groups in 12 schools. The center's reputation spread. Parents who'd felt powerless suddenly had an advocate with resources, expertise, and thanks to Federico's reputation, the implicit threat that non-compliance would be noticed by people you didn't want noticing. Maria Gonzalez, Isabella's former aide, now worked as the center's director of educational oversight. Her job was identifying systemic failures before they destroyed more children. "We are not just fighting individual cases anymore," Maria told Federico during a quarterly review. "We are changing how schools think about disability. Teachers who used to see accommodations as special treatment now understand their civil rights." "How many complaints this month?" Federico asked. 43 new cases, up from 38 last month. "But that's actually good. It means parents are learning they can fight back."
Federico nodded.
"And the school districts?" 3 are implementing voluntary reforms to avoid being investigated. 2 are being sued. 1 superintendent retired rather than face the publicity. Good. Lydia Brennan faced consequences that accumulated like falling dominoes. Professional. Teaching license permanently revoked in 3 states. Named as defendant in 7 civil lawsuits. Testimony used in federal investigation of Westfield Elementary. Became case study in educational negligence textbooks. Financial. Settlement payments to families. Her teacher's union insurance covered most, but her personal assets were garnished for punitive damages. Legal fees that consumed her savings. Unemployable in any educational setting. Personal. Featured in national news stories about educational abuse. Lydia Brennan became shorthand for teachers who harm disabled students. Her name appeared on disability rights advocacy websites as an example of systematic failure. She lived alone in a small apartment, working retail, her teaching career destroyed. The local news occasionally ran updates. Where is Lydia Brennan now? Perpetually reminding the public of her crimes. Some might call it excessive. Federico called it proportional. She'd harmed children for 15 years. She could spend 15 years living with the consequences. Principal Hartwell took early retirement at 53. His pension reduced due to the settlement. He worked as a consultant for a private educational company, far from any position of authority over children. The school board was transformed. Sarah Mitchell, acting as president, implemented aggressive reforms. Mandatory disability awareness training for all staff. External audits of special education programs. Parent advocacy board with actual authority to investigate complaints. Transparent complaint process with third-party oversight. Zero tolerance policy for IEP violations. Douglas Criss, Janet Morrison, and Robert Thompson all lost their positions, one through resignation, two through recall elections. The new board included 3 parents of disabled children. Westfield Elementary became a model for reform not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. Federico sat in the back row of Riverside Elementary's auditorium, trying and failing to be inconspicuous. Difficult when you're Federico Romano, even in casual clothes. Isabella's 4th grade class was presenting their marine biology research projects. She'd spent months studying dolphin communication, working with actual researchers through a mentorship program the Advocacy Center had funded. When her turn came, Isabella walked to the front of the auditorium.
No trembling, no tears.
Just calm focus. She spoke not signed, spoke with the confidence of a child who knew she was valued. My project is about how dolphins communicate. They use clicks, whistles, and body language. Scientists used to think dolphin brains were just smaller versions of human brains. But they're not smaller, they are different. They process information in ways we are still learning to understand. She paused, looking directly at the audience. Being different doesn't mean being less. It means being uniquely adapted to your environment. Dolphins are perfect for their world. And I'm perfect for mine. The audience applauded. But Federico saw what others might have missed: Isabella's small gesture, signing toward him, "Thank you." After the assembly, a nervous 1st grade teacher approached Federico. "Mr. Romano? I wanted to thank you. Your advocacy center helped my son. He has autism too. We finally got the accommodations he needed."
Federico nodded.
"That's what it's for. It must be strange," she said carefully. "Everyone knows your other work. But this is changing lives." Federico watched Isabella laughing with her friends, signing rapidly about something exciting. "I used to think power was about controlling territory, crushing enemies, building an empire that couldn't be challenged." He met the teacher's eyes. "My daughter taught me that real power is using your resources to protect people who can't protect themselves. Empires crumble. But change lasts." As they walked out, Marco fell into step beside him. "Boss, the Castellano situation requires your attention. Also, the Advocacy Center's lawyers need approval for expansion into 3 more districts. And he paused. You're scheduled to speak at Isabella's school on Thursday. Aquatic conservation." Federico smiled slightly.
Handel Castellano.
"Approve the expansion." And Marco. "Yes, boss. Cancel my afternoon meetings on Thursdays. Permanently. Isabella's class is studying oceanography all semester. I'm volunteering as a guest speaker every week."
Marco blinked.
"You know about aquatic conservation? I've been studying. Isabella's teaching me." Federico's expression softened. "Besides, someone needs to make sure these teachers understand that every child, especially disabled children, deserves respect, resources, and patience." He looked back at the school building one more time. "And if they forget, they'll remember who Isabella Romano's father is." The Romano crime family's reputation had evolved into something unprecedented. Still dangerous. Still powerful. But now also known for something else: protecting vulnerable communities, especially disabled children. The transformation hadn't been easy. Federico had lost some associates who couldn't adapt to the new model. Carlo Castellano eventually broke from the peace treaty, attempting to return to traditional operations. His empire crumbled within 2 years, not from violence, but from strategic economic pressure and the realization that communities protected by the Romano coalition were untouchable. The other families learned what Federico had understood. Real power isn't about inspiring fear. It's about creating systems that make people's lives better, then protecting those systems absolutely. The Advocacy Center expanded to 7 cities. The original 7 families whose children had been harmed by Lydia Brennan became the core leadership team, their lived experience guiding policy and strategy. Maria Gonzalez was promoted to executive director, overseeing a staff of 43 people. The center had helped over 2,000 families, removed 18 abusive teachers, and forced comprehensive reforms in 37 school districts. Disability rights advocacy groups initially viewed the center with suspicion. An organization funded by organized crime seemed like a contradiction. But results spoke louder than funding sources. The center's legal wins were legitimate, their training programs were effective, and their protection of vulnerable children was absolute. Eventually, other donors joined. The Romano name was still attached, but the center had grown beyond any single person or family. Isabella Romano stood on the deck of a research vessel off the coast, her notebook filled with observations about dolphin pod behavior. She was part of a junior marine biology program at the university, one of the youngest participants they'd ever accepted. She still rocked when anxious, still flapped her hands when excited, still went non-verbal sometimes when overwhelmed. But she'd learned something crucial. Those things didn't make her broken. They made her Isabella. Her phone buzzed. A text from her father. "How's the research trip?" She smiled and typed back, "Amazing." Saw a pod with a calf. Documented 3 different communication patterns. "Coming home Tuesday. Proud of you. Always. I know. Love you, Papa." She pocketed her phone and returned to her observations, Luna lying patiently beside her on the deck. In her backpack was a letter and invitation to speak at a National Disability Rights Conference. The Impact of Advocacy, a personal story. They wanted her to talk about her experience, about finding her voice, about what changed in education because one father refused to accept that his daughter should be harmed. She'd already drafted her speech. It started with a simple truth. "I was 8 years old when a teacher told me I was broken. I was 8 years old when my father taught me that the only broken thing was a system that hurt children for being different. And I was 8 years old when I learned that speaking up even when it's hard, even when you're scared, can change the world." 15 years after her license was revoked, Lydia Brennan lived in obscurity. She worked in retail, never advancing beyond entry-level positions. Her name occasionally appeared in disability rights literature as a cautionary example. Some people who knew her story felt the punishment was excessive. Others argued it was proportional to the harm she'd caused. Lydia herself had stopped fighting years ago. She'd lost all her appeals, all her lawsuits, all her attempts to reclaim her teaching career. In quiet moments, she sometimes wondered if she'd really been as cruel as everyone said. Then she'd remember Isabella Romano's small voice at the hearing, "You taught me to hate myself." And she'd know the answer. At 43, Federico Romano was an anomaly in organized crime. He still controlled vast business interests, still commanded respect and fear from rivals, still negotiated complex agreements between families. But he also spoke at education conferences, testified before legislative committees about special education funding, wrote op-eds about disability rights. His associates had adapted. Marco ran the family's legitimate businesses with the same strategic brilliance he'd once applied to territorial disputes. Victor trained security teams that protected not just Romano interests, but also the advocacy center staff and the families they served. The peace treaty he'd negotiated had lasted not because of threats, but because Federico had proven that collective investment created more sustainable power than constant conflict. His enemies still whispered that he'd gone soft, that caring about his daughter had made him weak. Federico didn't care. He'd learned the most important lesson of his life from an 8-year-old girl who'd been told she was broken. The strongest thing you can do is protect people who need protecting, speak for people who've been silenced, and refuse to stop until systems change. The board meeting, 5 years later. The 5 families gathered at the same neutral warehouse, but the atmosphere had transformed.
No tensión. No implicit threats.
Just strategic partners reviewing their collective investments. Education reform update, Marco began. The Advocacy Center has expanded to 11 cities. We've processed 2,347 cases, achieved reforms in 43 school districts, and our training programs have reached over 5,000 teachers. Community impact? Sophia Moroni asked. Significant. Schools in our neighborhoods have become models for inclusion. Parents are requesting transfers into our areas specifically because of the special education programs we funded. Viktor Folkovnoidid. My granddaughter graduated last year. Full inclusion, proper accommodations, thriving. She's at university now studying education. Says she wants to be the kind of teacher she wished she'd had. That's the legacy, Federico said quietly. Not territory. Not fear. Children who grow up safe, supported, and transform into adults who make the world better. Carlo Castellano's nephew Carlo himself had died 2 years ago, his empire fractured by his refusal to adapt. Spoke up. My uncle used to say you'd gone soft, Federico. That protecting your daughter made you weak. I know. He was wrong. The young man's voice carried genuine respect. You transformed 5 families that had been killing each other for generations. You created sustainable power. You built something that lasts. That's not weakness. That's evolution. Federico smiled slightly. Thank you. But the credit belongs to Isabella. She's the one who showed me what real strength looks like. Federico sat in the back row of the auditorium at the National Disability Rights Conference. Isabella, now 13, was about to deliver her keynote speech to over 500 advocates, parents, educators, and policymakers. She walked onto the stage calm, confident, with Luna beside her.
No trembling. No sham.
Just a young woman who'd found her voice and intended to use it. My name is Isabella Romano, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. When I was 8 years old, a teacher told me I was broken. That my autism made me a burden. That I'd never succeed like normal children. She paused, meeting the audience's eyes. She was wrong. I'm not broken.
I'm autistic.
My brain works differently, not worse, just different. I process information in ways neurotypical people don't. I see patterns others miss. I understand dolphins better than most adults because I recognize their communication differences as legitimate, not deficient. But when I was 8, I believed I was broken. Because the adult in authority told me so. Repeatedly. In front of my peers. While denying me legally mandated accommodations. Her voice strengthened. My father taught me something crucial. When systems harm vulnerable people, those systems must be dismantled and rebuilt. Not through violence, through strategic, relentless advocacy. The teacher who harmed me lost her license. The principal who protected her retired in disgrace. The school board that enabled them was transformed. And the system that allowed 15 years of abuse now faces comprehensive oversight. But individual consequences aren't enough. We need systemic change. We need teachers trained in neurodiversity. We need administrators who understand that accommodations are civil rights, not special treatment. We need parents empowered to fight for their children without fear of retaliation. She gestured to the audience. Every person in this room has a story. A child who was harmed. A system that failed. A moment when you decided enough was enough. I want you to know, your advocacy matters. Your refusal to accept injustice changes lives. Your willingness to fight even when it's hard, even when you're scared, creates the world our children deserve. I'm 13 years old.
I'm autistic.
I'm going to be a marine biologist. And I'm living proof that when powerful people use their resources to protect vulnerable communities, transformation is possible. She paused, then signed as she spoke. We are not broken. We are not less. We are perfectly adapted to our own environments. And we deserve respect, support, and the absolute certainty that adults will protect us, not harm us. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. Federico watched from the back row, tears streaming down his face for the second time in his life. The first time had been at her testimony 5 years ago, when she'd found her voice. The second time was now, watching her use that voice to change the world. Sometimes the most dangerous thing a powerful person can do isn't destroy their enemies. It's protect the vulnerable and refuse to stop until systems change. Federico Romano learned this from his daughter, an 8-year-old girl who'd been told she was broken but proved she was perfect exactly as she was. He transformed an empire built on fear into a legacy built on protection. And Isabella Romano, autistic, brilliant, absolutely unstoppable, grew up knowing that her differences weren't deficiencies. They were superpowers. And the world would learn to recognize that. One classroom, one policy, one transformed system at a time. Because when a father loves his daughter enough to change the world for her, that change echoes far beyond one family. It transforms everything.